All right, we should be recording now.
Excellent. We are dealing today with the Constitution of the United States of America. It should be said that we will not be covering the amendments today, but that's really important
Yeah.
because a number of the issues that we might be bringing up today may have and will have been addressed by the amendments, certain corrections made to the document. Next week, if I'm correct, we take up the Bill of Rights and the amendment. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it should just sort of be said that some of our criticisms might be cleared up with the amendments.
Yes.
Um, I'll just start out because the question I had, and it's gonna be one of my closing sort of questions as well, or related to a closing question, is and let me go back to my other set of notes here, is why it was the case that essentially the Articles of Confederation gave way to the U.S. Constitution. So the Articles of Confederation were a type of constitution, right? It was written, it
Mm-hmm.
was a set of laws, everyone had to abide by it, so on and so forth. Sort of the preeminent codified law of the land. And then it changed,
Yeah.
right? And I'm looking at my dates that we went over last time. I don't need to go over all of them, but we are looking at seven. Sorry. So Articles of Confederation are finally ratified in 1781. Revolutionary War ends in 1783, and then the U.S. Constitution is created, presented, ratified, implemented between 1787 and 1789. So basically, you've got a roughly 8 year um, space between the ratification of the articles. So they were, um, yeah, they were enacted for that 8 year period, and then we have a new one,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going to be related to a question I have later um, about why we are hell bent on holding to this this Constitution. If there are major flaws, if it is dated, if it has X, Y, and Z problem, why can't we just simply come up with a new Constitution? That'll be a later question. But the earlier question is why the change, right?
I think the answer's in the first sentence of the Constitution.
Go for it.
In order to form a more perfect union, right?
Yeah.
Establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote general welfare, secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our
Hmm.
posterity.
Right.
Um, so, I mean, I guess they noticed there were flaws in the other one, and they wanted to
Hmm.
address those.
Right.
I mean, it seems as simple as that, perhaps.
Yeah. Some of the outside reading, and I think I maybe mentioned some of these things too, is that the Articles of Confederation basically created a central government that was designed to be ridiculously weak, and maybe to a fault, right?
Wait, the articles.
Um,
You said the
the
articles? Yeah.
articles, the
Okay.
articles, right? And because we talked a little bit about the historical context, it makes sense, right? The British Crown was just sort of absolute. We'll use sort of a Lockean term, and borderline tyrannical. So if we set up a new constitution, we don't want to model ourselves accordingly. So you could see at least so it's almost sort of like a pendulum swing, right? So we don't want to be that, but then it's going a little bit too far. Um, and I say that in light of the fact that um, and I did a little bit more reading here. The language is funny in the articles because it sounds like the central government it can actually collect taxes from the states, but it really was more of a volunteer basis, almost like an offering at church, right?
Mm-hmm.
You should do it. You don't, no one's going to compel you to. And so that's going to create a problem um, in terms of, uh, well, specifically having a national military, which you don't have under the articles, right? You only have state militias.
Right.
So, so as a national presence, then up against another national presence, you're not going to have the backing of a national military. You have to sort of work with the individual state militias, and I'm guessing this is a little bit of guesswork, to compel them into battle, because I think the state militias are still under the jurisdiction of the state governor.
Yep.
You understand?
They have to
And if
come
the
up
governor's
to
like,
with an
no,
agreement there.
right? If the governor's like, no, I'm not going to send my militia out to defend um, the Confederation, then you know what I'm saying? You're sort of stuck, and you don't have this massive military presence up against another nation, as it were. Um, which also entailed that states basically were to conduct their own foreign policies. So that was not, now that's not the case, right? We've got Congress doing that. We have an executive doing that. That's coming up with foreign
Well,
policies.
they weren't doing all their foreign policies. Well, I guess
No,
maybe the ones
it,
all the ones related to war were agreements of the
yes,
states. Yeah, okay.
correct, exactly. Um, and then it raises sort of a question then what was left for the Confederation to do, or that Confederate Congress to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, oh, another one too was that there was a lot of debt, which actually comes up in part in the Constitution too. So there was a lot of war debt during the Revolutionary War, and if the Confederate Congress wasn't able to collect taxes to pay for that debt, you've got a problem there too, right? If it's on a voluntary basis.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, so it seems that the pendulum is sort of swinging with the Constitution. Then, I just think it's interesting to note you have a Constitution replacing another one
Yeah.
within an 8-year period. That's
Mm-hmm.
just really interesting. And because this one's been so long standing, what are we at? 1789. So 100, 200 and some years, right?
Yep.
Um, it's gain, you have anything around that long, it's sort of going to gain this hallowed, sacred sort of aspect that maybe is one of the reasons that if proposals were made to change it, um, it's hard to do. It's been a standing constitution for a very long time,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But I'll raise my own criticisms about, like, in other words, why, because you might respond, or one might respond, well, why change it? What's the problem, right?
I mean, or
Um,
if we have amendments, why, like, is that not enough?
sure. Yeah, exactly. Um, so, so yeah, I mean, we have a new one coming in for a variety of reasons. Um, and yeah, let's tackle it. So you read from the preamble,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I'm sort of curious how you deal with some of these phrases, in terms of what they mean. We the people, a more perfect union, establishing justice, ensuring domestic tranquility, providing for common defense, promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty, all pieces of the preamble.
Mm-hmm.
How do you understand some of those phrases?
Sure. So, I mean, I'm assuming we the people is going to be referring to the same, pretty much the same people as the Articles of Confederation.
Hmm. Hmm.
The people which were at that time considered the people like the white male people of
Hmm.
the United States,
Hmm.
right, citizens. Um, in order to form a more perfect union, I'm guessing this is talking about like the union between the states, because before they're pretty segregated in what they were doing under the
Hmm.
Confederation.
Hmm.
So it just puts them more on the same page in regards to laws and these other aspects. Establish justice. This is going to be in regards to the judicial branch. That's going to be,
Hmm.
the one of the three branches of government over all the states,
Right.
um, and kind of keeping those in check, because that wasn't really like before in the
Yeah.
Articles of Confederation. It was pretty much all just laws,
Yeah.
and then agreements between the
And,
states.
and as it were, their function was the function of the Confederate Congress was to, or Continental Congress, sorry, was primarily legislative.
Yeah, definitely.
So you don't have the only executives would have been governors,
Right.
but none in the sort of international or national level.
Yeah.
Sort of, it would have been governors, and then it would have been what else? Um, oh yeah, no, I'm sorry, the judicial
hmm
uh, functions, but that would also be state at the level of the state. So the innovation, as it were, is that we have an executive at the federal level. We've got a judicial at the federal level as well. That
Yeah.
would be the one two of the big innovations here.
And that's definitely part of the Union because, like, if before, just under the Confederation, they they'll have this, this overarching Congress that just establishes the laws, but
Hmm.
then I guess how those are interpreted or judged could be different per state.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there would be conflicts between those kinds of civil matters between states and people going across borders and that kind of stuff. So
Hmm.
this is definitely going to address some of those issues. Um, Domestic tranquility. I mean, that sounds like. Uh, wait. Why is,
Domestic tranquility seems to also sort of overlap a little bit with what you said about union, right?
yeah.
Because it's basically it's sort of like intrastate,
Yeah. So I guess
like
that's also
peace between the states, as it were.
yeah also related to the judicial.
Hmm.
Common defense. So this is going to address what you just brought up about
Hmm.
kind of having a backing for all of the United States instead of each individual state,
Right.
and promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So this part is again kind of that weird terminology that the Confederation had.
Hmm.
In where was that? Was that in the first paragraph of the Confederation or
Remind me,
Article
wait,
One?
just paraphrase.
It was just talk. Oh, maybe it was the Declaration. The yeah, I mean, just talking about liberty and I can't remember the word. Remember how we
Articles?
were talking about they sounded like it was the definition of the same thing.
Yeah. Oh. You think it was the articles or the?
The liberty, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. It kind of sounds
Oh,
like
right,
that, like a
right.
reiteration of that. That was in the Declaration. Um,
Yeah, yeah, promote the general welfare does well. Actually, both of them sort of seem to, and secure the blessings of liberty, right?
yep,
General welfare.
would be
How do we
life.
understand that?
Yeah.
If we read the Declaration or the Constitution through the Declaration, then it would be life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness,
hmm
right? Especially the word welfare there.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, to secure the blessings of liberty. For me, the obviously we the people is not going to be at least prior to the amendments, right?
Yep.
Is not going to be it's a small circle like you had mentioned,
hmm
landed white, mostly Protestant, you
Yep.
know, men. So women don't have the vote at this point. The overarching sort of context here is slavery.
hmm
Um, that in no point of the Constitution is slavery abolished. In no point is it explicitly encouraged, but at the same point, that was an institution that was alive and well.
hmm
Um, so you've got the whole like three-fifths
Yep.
count for each black individual in the Union. So they're not in that circle. It's different. I'm guessing Indians, or as they call them, Indians in the Constitution, but Native Americans are also not in that circle.
Right.
Um, and well, I mean, not that there was a massive immigration, right? But I guess you could sort of say other races, would not be included.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably.
Um,
I mean, one thing that's interesting just from that, because there's the restricted definition of we the people, but there are more than just those people involved, right? Like men
Right.
and women are living together in the United
Sure.
States. It's not just a nation of
Right.
men. Um,
Right.
it's like it's weird because um, if you assume that we the people means just like that restricted group, then it's like
Hmm.
are these things like or to what extent are these things extended to the other people?
Hmm.
Um, there's going to be justice and domestic tranquility and common defense and promoting the general welfare for the women back then,
Right.
um, but maybe not to the same degree.
Right.
Um, or maybe it's just the liberties are different, but they do get the benefits of the justice and the domestic tranquility. So that's definitely an interesting thing to think about. Is like to what extent are these rights given to the different people groups? Because I don't
I
think it's
mean,
just black and
well,
white.
what is interesting is that, um, when so everything in the preamble is very universal, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, so obviously, we the people, I mean, everything's universal. We the people, and then everything that follows is universal. So you think it covers everyone, but you're right. We're right to point out that when it's we the people, that particular phrase is limited.
Hmm.
But at the same point, everything that sort of follows would be covering, let's say, at least women, possibly, I want to be careful here, but possibly slaves, in the sense that, I mean, there's still the dark side, right? Because slaves are considered property.
Right.
So but you want to certainly have like domestic tranquility as it relates to one's property.
Hmm.
You want to provide for a common defense, meaning like, in having a national military that it's not like they're only going to be defending white men within the Union, right? I mean,
Hmm.
if attacked, so on and so forth, it would be protecting everyone, right? So, um, yeah, I would say it's nuanced. The we the people is tricky. The other elements do sort of, let's say, protect some of the rights of non-white men, right?
Hmm.
Right. But it doesn't have the sort of because obviously you've got states holding elections, right, for the representatives
Hmm.
and for senators and for president. But at that time, women didn't have the right to vote. So that's so it's not as if the full range of rights are enacted for each party within the union,
Hmm.
even though some aspects of the preamble would cover the union, everyone in
Right.
it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I think one other thing I wanted to bring up while we're still here. So in the copy that we're reading, there are segments that are in square brackets with an asterisk, and those are the parts that are amended later. And I mean, the preamble isn't amended, right? So the
Right,
phrase "we the people" um, is determined by the context of the argument, right? Like
right.
you need the context to understand what that means,
Hmm.
which is a very important thing because it's like because the amendments were made to the other parts of the document, this
Right.
now has a different meaning as to who it extends
Yeah,
to.
totally, totally. Nope, I see that. I
Hmm.
see that. Right. I mean, in other words, and we'll have to get into this next week, the whatever's going on historically with the amendments is obviously addressing some aspect, and then all of a sudden with the amendment, it's almost sort of like this might be a bad analogy, but like uh, when let's say, early Christians only had the Old Testament, the Greek version of the Old Testament, the Septuagint. That was sort of like, as it were, the main covenant, or even let's say practicing Jews before the advent of Christianity. But then when you tag on the New Testament, the coloring and understanding of the Old Testament changes, right?
Hmm.
Because now you're seeing like, oh, all of these, let's, as an example, all of these particular prophecies for a Messiah are actually pointing to this person, Jesus, as opposed to just sort of a general Messiah coming in to save the world, right? So that by,
Hmm.
by attaching that second testament, as it were, that colors the first,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
right? So, um, good. What 7 articles? Not a
7 articles.
lot.
Not a lot.
It's sort of interesting reading this,
Yeah, I was
because
like, wow,
there's so
this,
much talk about the Constitution of the United States, and it's like 7 articles.
and they're all pretty straightforward and short. So I'm pretty
Pretty,
sure
yeah,
the Bill of Rights and the amendments are going to be more interesting and
yeah,
content-wise.
yeah, no
Um,
doubt.
but yeah, I mean, so we have Article One talking about like the first three articles are talking about the different branches. I
Yep,
think,
you got it. Yep,
um,
legislative,
yeah,
Article 1, legislative, Article 2, executive, Article 3, judicial.
and I think Four, did it also spill into
States
judicial? Yeah.
powers,
Okay. Yeah, states powers. Okay. But yeah, I
which
mean,
will be, yeah,
started like I guess kind of an overall thing about these articles. They feel like a much more detailed version of the Confederation, and then of course addressing the three different branches
mm-hmm,
that we're talking about. So
mm-hmm,
they've got like dates, they've got like how like orders of operation, how the the different people are going to be organized in these
yeah.
institutions, which is I don't think there was really much at all. Was there much at all about years in the
I don't
Confederation,
recall at
like
this point.
office?
Let's see my notes. The let's see.
Okay, I guess. Wait, a term of 6 years. So
They do have Article 5 was of the Articles of Confederation. You create That creates the Congress of the Confederation.
hmm
Each state gets one vote in Congress and can send between 2 and 7 people to participate in Congress.
okay, it does
Um,
look like they have a little bit about years, like 3 to 6
yeah,
years for a term.
right.
But now that we're getting the Constitution, we have we've got the House of Representatives,
Yeah,
and then the Senate, and those are much more structured
yeah.
than just okay, we've got people on the board of
No, very,
Congress.
very exactly, exactly. Clarifying the specifics of the branch.
Yeah. Um, I wonder where they got the idea of the House and the Senate from. I'm not too familiar with that, so I don't know if you have any input on that. Oh, did you cut out?
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for some reason, each time an alarm goes off, I cut out.
hmm
Make sure we don't have that problem again.
Did you hear what I said?
Say it again,
Sure.
please.
So I was just wondering, like, where they might have gotten the idea of the House of Representatives and the Senate.
Hmm.
Like, I don't really know the history behind that. Like, if they came up with that themselves or if they were looking at other governments. Do you have any insight on that?
I do know. So I know that there. So you have obviously within where they're coming from. Um, in Great Britain, you have a king, and then you have the Parliament. The
hmm
Parliament, at this time, I feel like was also broken into parts, into literally bicameral,
hmm
two particular um, sort of groups within it. But the Senate actually harkens way back to ancient Rome. So during the in ancient Rome, you have the phases of um, a monarchy that then changes into a republic, and this is going to be the point which you have a robust Senate. So you still,
hmm
I believe, at this point, you still have a Caesar, a leader, but then you have the Senate, which I'd have to do a little bit of more research on, but the Senate existed, um, and sort of I don't know their full power. And what I do recall is that there were a lot of different offices within the Senate, almost sort of like a tax code that could be somewhat confusing. And then um, and then that gave way to the empire. So you had an emperor, and I believe the Senate was still alive and well, but its power was lessened because there was a focus on, I don't want to say tyranny, but something like that.
hmm
One main ruler. Um, So the idea of a Senate, of sort of this body that's not, um, where the power is not vested in one individual, has a long historical precedent, and um, and is what, as it were, makes a Republican society a Republican society, where um, you have the, as it were, the public represented by a number of elected officials. It sort of, has the ear of the main leader.
Hmm.
But here, the big difference is you don't have an empire, an emperor, as it were.
Right.
Um, and that obviously the framers are trying to put limitations on the branches in terms of what they can or cannot do,
Hmm.
which would be novel. Um, so yeah, the yeah, you've got that in this context. You've got the House of Representatives and the Senate that's making up the legislative. It is interesting that in reading this, that the, at least in budgetary, I think it said, um, or monetary issues, it needs to be, all bills need to be represented, or sorry, presented and introduced in the House. And that's sort of, I still have sort of a question about that,
Where was
because
that?
it doesn't. Uh, Probably going to be Article 1. Um,
Right.
all bills, yeah, Section 7 of Article 1, all bills raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may
Ah.
propose or concur with amendments as on other bills. So that what the, I mean, the interesting thing about a bill, right, is how you can, and I've always found this to be a very curious thing, but the Constitution seems to allow it, is how you can tag on all of these particular, like, amendments to the bill, right?
Hmm.
Even if they're not even specifically related to the theme of the bill. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that's part of the, sort of political game that's played, right? Well, I will agree to this bill, and I will vote for this bill if I'm able to tag on this amendment that may or may not be related to the main topic of the bill, right? So
Mm.
it's sort of an element of compromise. And at some point, we should maybe look at a bill. I mean, I know right now there's the COVID relief bill. I want to say it's 1.9 trillion. I'm not sure if that's changed. And there were various amendments put on that bill. I believe one actually deals with minimum wage, right? So that's not like clearly. I know. I mean, I understand that the bill is financially oriented, right? It's about money
Hmm.
and the distribution of it. So you could still say, hey, it's somewhat connected. And then there's a fight about that amendment to the overall COVID relief bill, right?
Hmm.
I mean, that it might actually be interesting at some point to look at, either a bill in the past that has a bunch of amendments attached to it, or even this one that they're debating right now,
Mm.
um, to see, because I believe you can amend anything to it. I don't think, and then it's a matter of whether or not it'll get a vote.
Right.
But once it's voted, then that particular amendment sort of gets shoehorned in.
Interesting.
Um, so I still, the sort of my middle school understanding is that House presents the bill, they vote on it. If it passes, it goes to the Senate votes on it. If it passes, it goes to the president, and then he can, sign it into law or veto it. And then they do have the provision, the two-thirds provision, that if he vetoes it, he can go back to the House. And I think the House and Senate need to have two-thirds majority in
Hmm.
order to bypass the presidential veto,
Right.
which is interesting. So it's like, hey, president's got the power, but at the same point, if the House and Senate really want to push this through and have the votes, they can get their two-third majority, and it can become law without the president, which I think is a very interesting balance
Yeah, definitely.
of power. Um, but my point is, what I don't know is whether or not, I like, I don't know. It always seems like it has to go from House to Senate to president, but can it start at the Senate?
I
You
think it
know,
can.
and then, you know, you know, yeah, and I just don't know how that works. Would that go House, or that go Senate? Senate approves, then it goes to the House and then to the president, you know? Um,
Probably. Yeah, I don't know if it's mentioned here.
I yeah, I mean, other than that little comment, the Senate may propose or concur with amendments as on other bills, and then it just goes right through the general process, right, from House to Senate to President.
Yeah.
So, and then seven, I'm sorry, Article 8 is just dealing with um, taxes and what those taxes need to be used for.
Mm-hmm.
9 deals with essentially immigration. Um, and then 10 is starts with sort of like, well, actually, it's sort of, I mean, states' rights, but really what states can't do.
Right.
And then we get into the president. So there's not, right, there's not a lot on, um, as I recall, on whether or not the Senate can actually produce a law or a bill.
Right.
Um, Again, that might be covered with an amendment. Um, yeah, because yeah, Section 2 is House of Representatives, Section 3 is Senate. Um, but it's more about sort of appointments, age requirements, things like that. Um, one thing I did think was interesting here is I did think about Plato's everyone stays in their own part, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the, I mean, not that they got it from Plato, but it's like, hey, if you're a House of Representatives, if you're a member of the House of Representatives, you can't hold any other office. If you're president, you can't hold any other office. If
Mm-hmm.
you're a senator, you can't hold it. You know, it's very sort of like um, specified in terms of what you do.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, if we're interested in sort of pursuing that question about the Senate, we can
Yeah, I don't know. I just did a quick
do
Google
our own
search. So
side
the Senate,
research.
like currently, the Senate can initiate
Okay,
bill ideas, and then it goes to the House. I don't know if that was if there were amendments that made that more explicit, or if that was just assumed, or
right.
the history of that. But yes, now they
Yes,
can.
got it, got it.
Um,
Cool.
yeah.
So and then we get, so I feel like what happens in the Constitution compared to the Articles is you really have a detailed clarification of what Congress looks like.
Yes. Yep.
I mean, you had it before, essentially sort of a representative from each state or whatever. It said 2 to 7, I think. But now you've got that issue of like, okay, um, it's going to be broken down into these two parts. Here are the age requirements. I do think it's interesting that the House of Representatives is a
Has-
younger age requirement than
yeah.
the Senate,
I was
right?
thinking the same thing. I was like, what is the
You know,
logic behind that?
yeah. And I'm wondering if within the framers' mindset, there's this element that, it's one thing to sort of like propose a bill. Let's say the general trajectory is House to Senate to President, right? Uh, but sort of older and wiser in the second branch
Right.
that's going to evaluate that bill, um, and and see if it passes muster with that group that's just sort of a little bit more experienced,
Yeah, and there's fewer of them too. So it's like if you've got like
Yes.
in the house you've got more people, so maybe their
Yeah.
intelligence kind of averages out more.
Yeah.
So you
Hmm.
maybe it's a balance for that. I don't know.
Yeah. Um, and then you have the same age requirement for the president as well. So I'm getting sort of that sense,
Hmm.
that as it climbs up, you want someone that has a little bit more wisdom, as it were, or experience.
Right. What were
Um,
the numbers? Was it 25, 30, and 35, or was it 25, 35, 35?
20. I think it's 25, 35, 35.
Okay. Yeah.
So
So a gap of 10 years.
Hmm. I do think that the so you've got some interesting parts here in this section, obviously. Um, I mean, it is interesting that they already, because they seemingly they had to institute something early on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're already assigning representatives for certain states, and this is obviously going to become an issue because the the question is how representative is Congress of the people, right?
Right.
And this is going to become a major problem when it comes to something like the Senate because it's going to be two senators per state.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that Rhode Island is going to get two senators, and so is California. Well, I mean, not at this time, right?
Right.
But you know what I'm saying now. So it's two senators each, and the question is, well, how representative is that? Because obviously the population is going to be a lot smaller in Rhode Island than it is in California. So the flip side of that then is if you actually did change the distribution, and it was and for the Senate it was based on population, then you then you have another problem, which is basically that California is always going to crush
Yeah.
Rhode Island
Mm-hmm.
in a vote, or the larger states will always crush the smaller states. So you've got that issue, the flip side of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of an interesting piece in terms of how representative is Congress. It seems like that you could play it out with the House of Representatives, right? Because that's the House of Representatives is based entirely upon population,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, and
Um,
with like the back and forth, it adds a really interesting dynamic because if like the states that have larger populations win in the House, and then
right.
it gets passed to the Senate, but it doesn't, it doesn't succeed there,
Hmm.
then it's basically saying that there these concentrated areas of people approve the bill,
Hmm.
but as a larger, I guess, government,
Hmm.
it they don't. So
Yeah.
it kind of tells you something about what, I guess, I don't know, tells you something about like geographically the interest of the bill, kind of,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is interesting. I don't know what implications that has, or like what what you get from that,
Right.
um, in regards to like fairness or things like that.
Yeah. 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 I see. This might be another element too about framers' time period versus our time period. I
Hmm.
mean, you've got 13 states now, right? Um, and we've got 50, and a larger population,
Yep.
a larger land mass to cover. Um, so it seems like there is a lot of questions about, you know, fairness of representation, you know. Um, so yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, I almost feel like there are innumerable questions and I don't know which one to attack,
Right,
you
and I
know.
guess to kind of address this in the direction of the question you had about making changes to the Constitution, or adopting a different system, um, I suppose there could be, there could definitely be issues with greed, with
Right.
like states that are highly, concentrated and they want
Yeah.
to have that power, so they don't
Sure.
want to change how the voting is represented.
Hmm.
Um, so that perpetuates the Constitution. Um, and kind of an interesting dynamic with that is it's like, well, the smaller states aren't going to really have the opportunity to be able to overrule that,
Yeah.
um, if that exists.
I mean, if you go back to the Articles of Confederation, obviously, I mean, there are a lot of different goals, but one of the goals was to provide state rights. And when we read the Federalist Papers, we're gonna be dealing with this question again.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, so I would say that at the level of, so let's forget population for a second, but at the level of states as individual operators, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or corporations, the two senators per state retains, it seems to support then state rights,
Sure.
right?
Yep.
It's going to be the states then are having equal representation in in government. That I can totally see,
Mm-hmm.
you know. When it comes down to, so that's at the state level, but when it comes down to the individual level, then it seems like we start to get into a problem, because you've got X millions of people in the United States, and the idea is that this government is representative, and that's going to be representative of, it's going to come down to numbers. It's going to be representative of individuals per capita.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, well, I guess it's not really representative of individual, right? But it is representative of states, or not representative. It's fair, as it were, for states,
Right.
right? So the little guy still gets there too, senators until, and the big guy gets there too as well. So no state is more powerful, even if it is richer, um, and more populous than another state. So that, I feel like at the state level, the argument makes sense, and that was part of this earlier genealogy, as you trace it back down to the Articles, right? Because they wanted to give the states power,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So, um, and obviously they're trying to accomplish a lot
Yeah.
here, you know.
Yep.
Um, so we get some clarification to then on the executive, which is a first.
Yes. Yep.
Um, the I think one of the changes is the vice president is the vice president is chosen by the Congress. Is that right?
Are you
I
looking
think
at
that's
the
one
fifth
difference. I'm
paragraph
in
or?
Article 2 now.
Yeah.
Um,
That's removal of the president. Oh yeah. So that's interesting. In one, two, three, four, five, the sixth paragraph of Article 2,
mhm.
in the case of removal of the president from office, it says both the president and the vice declaring what officer shall then act as president, and such officer shall act accordingly. Um, so the Congress will provide. Yeah, okay. What's interesting is that there it's not like a default that the vice president will take office. So,
Mhm.
and that's one of the sections that's amended. So I'm guessing
Mhm.
we'll get to that.
Trying to see, like, prior to the amendments, though, how the vice president is chosen. Um,
I'm trying to find out where it was, but I think it
yeah,
was whoever
it seems like it would
got the
be early
second
on.
vote. The vice president shall be president of the
So
Senate.
basically, here it is. Uh, oh, looks like it might be in the big paragraph on the electors.
Hmm.
At the end of that, it says, in every case, after the choice of the president, this is after the votes are in, the person having the greatest number of votes of the electors shall be the vice president. But it's still, so it almost makes it sound as if they're two different. Like, we vote for both, right? In other words, like, whoever got most of the electoral votes becomes president, and by the way, they have a vice president running with them, so they become vice president. But it sounds like they're almost running separately.
They are. Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember learning this. I don't know. I'm trying to find where
Sure.
it's stated, but yeah, it's whoever runs for the presidential office, whoever gets second place is the vice president.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I don't see where that's stated.
hmm
Oh, are you in
I
Article
think,
6?
no, I'm in Article
Oh wait, that's an amendment.
2.
Whoops.
Yeah. feel like it's a little silent actually about the vice president because the that big paragraph is on the electors is about the electors and the process of
Yes.
the electors like transferring their votes right to the Senate reading them, calculating them, etc. Um, so I will say this though, what we can look at that later. The uh, in reading about the electors, it something came up about to what extent the framers were very fearful of everyday common citizens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, because I still feel, I mean, and I mean, you know, all the arguments for and against the Electoral College, but I feel like there are more arguments against it, right? How is it the case that someone can win the popular vote and then lose the, electoral vote?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a really, it's a curiosity as to why they're there, you know, what function do they play? Um, I mean, I understand how it works. That's not the question. But like, what's gained by avoiding the popular vote and putting and resting it within in the electoral votes? Do you know? I mean, I'm looking. I feel it because I feel like there's more lost, but I'm interested in knowing what's gained. You know,
What's gained in the representatives?
what's gained in having an electoral college? What's gained in having an elector electoral votes per state. I mean, maybe it
Yeah.
comes down to a state back to a state rights argument. Um,
Mm.
that there's part of me that just feels like it's. I mean, I guess one argument is if you were just doing a popular vote, no electoral. Well, I don't know that this is necessarily true. I mean, I was sort of thinking that you would focus on the most populous states, and ignore the least populous states.
Oh, as a
But
strategy, as a
yes,
president,
yeah,
or yeah,
exactly, as a candidate,
candidate.
but so that I mean, I guess that would right? It's like okay, whatever, New York, Texas, California, focus all your efforts there, and so
Right.
you're not in the end. Then you're not really covering everyone,
Mm-hmm.
but in this way, you're actually sort of somewhat forced. And again, I'm thinking prior to blue and red states that we're in now, and the
Right.
type of polarization that we live with. Prior to that, where you can just sort of like if whatever the Democrat will run and just be like, I don't need to do much with Maryland because I'm a shoe-in,
Right.
or I don't, or the Republican, I don't need to do much with Texas because they're going to go red. So before that time, would that, does that force you then to actually, you know, well, let's say at this time, yeah, right. You would be, or I'm sorry, at that time, you would want to hit all 13 states,
Right.
and um, and in so doing that, you have to, you are a representative as an executive. It's not, well, ideally you are, right?
Yeah.
Um, so so you would be running in such a way to represent, as it were, all 13 states because you're candidating in all 13, as opposed to just, well, the state has has the most people. Um, I'll just focus my efforts here.
Right. Yeah. This is something me and my friends have been talking about, like with the well, once this most recent election came up, we were talking about different voting schemes and
Yeah,
how, or I say schemes, I mean like
yeah,
schematas.
I got you. I got
Not
you.
like,
No, no, I get
uh,
it.
yeah, not taking advantage of the system.
I
Um,
know my vocabulary.
yeah. Well, I just want to clear up
Yeah,
ambiguity.
no,
So yeah, we were kind of talking about different schemes and like what are the benefits of them? What are the downsides? Like, is there a way to please everybody?
yeah,
And it's definitely an interesting topic. Like, you'll see that like different countries are using different ones. So I haven't brushed up on the names of all of them, but I knew them a couple months ago. But
Yeah.
like Australia is using a different. I think they're using a ranked voting
Hmm.
scheme where basically
Hmm.
you vote for all the listed candidates in an order, and then the one that gets the highest tallies from the first choice, if it's a majority, then they're voted. If it's not, then you remove the lowest choice votes, or you remove the highest, like the first choice vote that got the lowest votes, and then you
Right.
retally. So then it basically, for anybody who voted for um, somebody who got the least votes, it then goes to their second pick.
Yeah.
And it goes in iterations, so it keeps knocking off the lowest person's votes until it establishes somebody who wins that ranking. That was a scheme that I found very interesting, and there are issues. There's a very nice YouTube video, maybe I'll link it in the
Sure.
description, that kind of has like an infographic and shows kind of the different now the schemes that you
Yeah.
can go against the patterns and try to
Yeah.
like game the system. And there are issues with basically every system, which is kind of yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really hard to please everybody or to know that you can be trustworthy at least.
I mean, I think what's interesting is that, even with the Constitution, and even with how government is run in the United States right now, is that there's an element of democracy, but it's not a pure democracy,
Yeah.
right? It's so I want to say it's democratically leaning,
Yeah. Hmm.
but it's not like full on, right? We send representatives to the House, to the Senate. We send seemingly a representative leader to the executive. Executive just straight up chooses judicial,
Right.
and that could just entirely be on personal whim. So that has not. I mean, we do not vote those in,
Right.
although judges at lower levels are,
Hmm.
you know. So I mean, I feel like it's a really mixed bag.
Yep.
Even I was thinking, I was like, there's nowhere in the Constitution that says that we are setting up a democratic regime.
Yep.
It's just that there's a lot of talk of majority. There's a lot of talk of votes, right?
Hmm.
Um, which is obviously a key element of democracy, but it's not full on that. So even with the electoral notion, the I feel like the electoral notion still has representative democracy, as the two branches of Congress and the executive do as well. It's still all just it's representing the people, but not straight on, votes. Like, I mean, one thing I found really interesting here in California, I don't remember them happening in Maryland much when I voted, but I'm sure they're there.
Hmm.
But all these propositions, and the propositions are straight up voted by every person, and it if whoever gets the majority, it's voted up or down, which is interesting. I mean, that's the propositions are a great example of the power of individual voters.
Hmm.
And you don't see that. And by the way, and it works, right? I mean, at one point, like, whatever, I think the legalization of marijuana came up, 8 to 10 years ago, and it was voted down. And then it came up 5 to 6 years ago, and it was voted up, and now it's legal, right?
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of other propositions. So, I mean, I personally like that mode, um, because it's 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 the most democratic expression, uh, as it relates to individual voters as opposed to representatives. Because representatives, it gets just really tricky. You know,
Yeah.
to what degree is the representative compelled
Yeah.
to represent? You know, and you could argue that they're compelled to represent on the basis of the next election cycle. So if they're not representing their state, well, leave it up to the election, and the people will vote them out. Or if they're representing, they'll keep them in.
Hmm.
You know, so I find that a very interesting feature of the Constitution. And when I read that, it was just in some of the side research about the framers having fear of the people. I wouldn't put it past them, you know. I mean, they're uh, well-educated, you know, elites versus sort of the common man, you know.
Right.
And I think too the arguments are going to become really interesting in the Federalist Papers because I think there is a lot of talk about not trusting the common man. I think it's more explicit.
Sure.
Whereas in the Constitution, we have to dig around and be like, well, is this why they have electors? Is this why they have representation? You know?
Yeah. I mean, so I guess on this topic, it's like um, the so your what you end up getting with representatives versus like pure democracy. With pure democracy, we have rule of the people,
Right.
and we have groups. You know, certain groups are going to be dominant, um, or it could be dominant in voting for a certain issue.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas with representatives, it dampens that issue.
Sure.
There's arguments of like, oh, is that fair? Because now people's votes are percentage-wise less than others, so does that make sense? Whereas with democracy, it's like, well, everybody gets a fair vote, but
Yeah.
everybody belongs to a different kind of social institution, and
Hmm.
maybe that's not equalized. So it's like, what are you equalizing? Are you equalizing the votes of the
Yes.
people? Are you equalizing the votes of the states? Are you
Yeah.
equalizing the votes of like demographics of the people?
Yeah.
Because demographics are a very interesting thing when it comes to people because you can divide them in so many ways. So
Yeah.
how do you try to represent all of those different aspects that make
I
up
totally
who a
agree,
person
but
is person? Yeah.
I would say this when you have a proposition and it's voted on by the people, you you totally get rid of all of the representative problems that you're articulating. You just get rid of them.
But
The
no,
only
my
issue is
problems aren't with the representatives.
okay.
These problems span both, right? The representative problem has to do with the proportion of what a vote means, right?
Sure.
The democracy problem is who is who like it has to do with the balance of the demographics of the people because now you can say okay well just let's just give like an example like say for example race is one of the demographics of the people and you've got like a majority of white people and they're voting for a
Right.
certain topic and that
Right.
can outdo
Oh,
the votes of other
I see what
races.
you're saying.
That's a big issue and that doesn't span just race, that spans many different kind of demographic lines. So then you're asking the question, well, um, is my vote being like my vote doesn't matter because now my demographic is smaller than other people in my nation. So that's the issue with
Hmm.
democracy, pure democracy.
Yeah. I mean, the tricky part there is I mean, so in other words, like it's obviously the essence of democracy is going to be power. The power is, well, it's ruled by people.
Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that as there are differences within the populace, not everyone's will and wish is going to be enacted.
Sure. Yeah.
So I guess the compromise, as it were, right,
Mm-hmm.
within a democracy is that you go with the majority.
Yes.
Now,
Yep.
that's obviously going to be tricky for the smaller demographic, right? That's not going to have their voice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the the element though is that, I mean, if we say that the rule of the majority is going to be wrapped up in democracy, that might be an unfortunate, you know, set of affairs.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, I mean, it's sort of like, then that's what we're living with, and if that's what we're living with, then the idea of the idea of the proposition is that it would be most representative. I would say that, to put it this way, I think that the the vote by the people on a proposition is more representative than a representative individual or individuals voting for a people,
Perhaps. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I mean, they attack the issue in a different way, and they
Right.
both solve different problems, and they have
Yeah.
conflicts in different areas. I'd be
Yeah.
curious. Like, I don't know of any government that does this, but you know, so with pure democracy, you're taking the individual unit to be a human. With like our with our United States government, we're taking the individual unit of voting in the case of elect the electoral college, so a certain number of people per state, right?
Hmm.
Um, I don't know of any voting systems that divide it by other demographics, but it would
Yeah.
be an interesting thing to see. I don't know if there are moral issues with it, but like if you took like the proportion of representatives, or maybe just you scaled the Democratic vote by the number of people who are white or who are,
Hmm.
of a different race, then it's like, well, does that make it more fair for people of
Yeah.
smaller
Yeah.
demographics? Do you divide it? But then the question becomes like, what demographics do you divide it by, and
Sure.
how are those quantifiable?
It's
Um,
almost like you're taking like the electoral college down to the level of group demographic,
Yeah, no,
right?
definitely.
Right.
Because, well, one of the things is it's like those demographics are somewhat determined by where you
Hmm.
live in
Hmm.
states. So
Hmm.
those demographics are going to show themselves in the representatives, but maybe not in the same kind of ways as if you divided it, kind of how I mentioned.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
The
mean,
tricky
yeah,
part, the tricky part too, is the assumptions are made about the demographic, though, right?
sure, yeah,
Massive
yep,
assumptions, because even if you have, let's just stick with the race example, even if you have sort of the demographic of Caucasian, African American, Asian American, Latino, so on and so forth, one can't assume that everyone within that demographic would vote the same way.
precisely, yep.
You know?
Everyone, and it makes it really complicated because everyone has their own demographic profile,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and like I said, the question becomes, how do you divide it? Do you have to divide it more than one way?
Yeah.
So the question of fairness when you're dealing with large groups of people voting on an issue is really difficult to deal with, and you have to have the compromises. And with a pure democracy, you're going to have the unfortunate events that a larger group that holds an opinion will outweigh the smaller group, and
Right.
I guess you have to accept that, or is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's complicated.
It is. It is. But I think in reading this, it just made me more and more aware of um, how representative it is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not representative in the fact that it's representing me, but
Right.
it's structurally representative.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, obviously there are advantages too. I mean, I'm sort of my brain goes back to sort of a little bit of Plato and Aristotle as well, about for Plato anyway, who do you want to rule? You want the philosopher king, and oh my God, he's got to go through all of these hoops and over these hurdles in order to become like this great wise, well, let's be honest, military sort of leader, wise man, right? Because he's
Mm-hmm.
got to go through the physical, he's got to go through the gymnastics, as it were. He's got to sort of serve in the military. He's got to study all the forms. And so that person then is not. I mean, it's certainly it's not representative. Plato doesn't care about that, right? He bemoans democracy,
Mm-hmm.
but um, but you sort of tie that in, and at least ideally, if it is the case that our representatives, are well trained in the law, and if and, which is not always the case, but a lot of them, whatever, study
Sure.
politics, let's say, and have served in lower branches of government, and have the experience, right? And let's say the experience of, age to a degree, then you have sort of the a little bit of the philosopher king or the philosopher representative. So like how should I mean, this is ideal. I don't think this is how it works, because I think realpolitik is probably more Machiavellian than we think, right?
Yep. Yep.
Or then, I mean, yeah, that it's political survival from one day to the next, and it's voting along party lines in order to survive, and who am I representing?
Mm-hmm.
But ideally, maybe there's that element there that, yes, I am speaking for the people, but I'm speaking for the people as an expert, um and and in within that expertise, I need to weigh out all of these differences
Mm-hmm.
within the population. I mean, I'd like to think that if you and I served, that would be the thought. I don't think that that's always the thought, right? I think a
Right.
lot of it's power grabbing, and then it's also how do I retain this power,
Yeah.
and maybe throw bones occasionally to the people that I'm representing to show that I'm doing their work. Um, and I'm sure that there probably are people within Congress that are more along the ideal, you know,
Yeah.
or to take Aristotle's, which is still virtue laden, is I mean, it's again, it's not really representing the people, but it's still the leader needs to be a virtuous, you know, individual.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to have nailed down these virtues and then rule and govern accordingly. So I could sort of see that piece possibly being worked in. I'm not. The framers were well read. I don't know how much they were. I feel like they were reading Locke more than Plato and Aristotle. But was that a piece that was coming in, sort of wisdom and experience plus representation? You know,
Right.
as opposed to just being a total pure mirror of the group that they're representing. You
Yeah.
know, um, so yeah. We were on that for a while, which
We
is
were.
fine because it was interesting.
Yes. Uh, how do we want to continue?
We can wrap it up or highlight a couple of other pieces that we didn't cover. I mean, obviously, we talked about the judicial branch in part.
Mm-hmm.
The the section on the state rights too is very interesting because the states are subordinate to uh, the sorry are subordinate to the federal government, and and everyone is subordinate to the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that we're reading. Um, so yeah, I mean, maybe it's a good stopping point because we've gone on for a bit.
Yeah. And these last articles are kind of smaller.
Yeah, sort of right. I mean, there's meat in them, but not as not it's sort of not like what we were chewing on, which I thought was good.
Yeah.
So next week we turn to the Bill of Rights and the amendments.
Amendments. Yeah, that'll be cool. Alrighty.